Hey everybody, it's Tristan Hunter here, and I want to first start out just by saying thank you all so much for taking interest into the Beginning Teacher Institute. I hope today's session, Establishing Success Criteria, leaves you all empowered and also leaves you all ready with some easily transferable action steps that you all can start doing in your classroom, hopefully as soon as tomorrow. This session is one of the pre-recorded sessions, so by nature, it'll probably be no longer than 30 minutes. What I would encourage you all to do as you are going through this session is to pause in between where those natural pauses are, or when I'm asking you all to do certain things, just to lean into those and pause and do the activities along just as we would if you were doing a live session. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into establishing success criteria. So here's what we're going to be doing today, everybody. We're going to start out by just defining success criteria. So taking a look at what success criteria actually looks like. Then after that, we're going to jump into the importance of success criteria. So why do we need success criteria inside of our classrooms? How is it relevant? How is it applicable? All of those things. Then we're going to take a look at some examples of success criteria. So we're going to look at what these look like in 5 specific subject areas. And I just want to be able to show you all just how easy it is to implement across multiple subject areas. Then you all are going to have the opportunity to actually craft your own success criteria. So we're going to spend some time doing both some guided and independent practices. And of course, I'll leave a few minutes at the end just for questions, comments, and concerns. So let's go ahead by just starting out talking about what exactly success criteria means. So when we start talking about this idea of success criteria, research says that success criteria can be defined as a provided example of desired outcomes in a lesson, right? And we have this research example here, or this research-based definition. But what I want you to think about here is this idea of an example, right? Or a model, exemplar, all of those things when we think about the research-based definition. But what does this actually mean when we translate this definition into our classroom? So for our classroom, success criteria can be used as kind of like a checklist to communicate with our students on how we should actually be performing up a certain task, or how we should be achieving a certain goal. So when you think about success criteria, think about it as the steps or the checklist items that my students can do in order to be successful on a particular task or a particular assignment. Now, there are different types of success criteria, and here's the thing. What most research, especially more recent research, is starting to show is that success criteria doesn't have to look just one way. You'll see this in the examples that we do later on in the presentation, but the success criteria has a range of types here. So it can be I can statements. So these are just your learning objectives, right? So if I was in an English class and my learning objective was, I can cite textual evidence. That can be used as a part of my success criteria. In the same way, rubrics can be used as well. And so are target responses. Remember, your target responses are either your constructive responses in your English and history and humanities-based classes, or your procedures or your steps that you're taking inside of like your math, science, STEM-based classes. Graphic organizers are also another form of success criteria. And alongside that, this concept of big ideas, right? So students being able to look at a lesson and say, these are the overarching ideas that I could take away from it. Now, I want to spend some time unpacking these just a little bit more. So the really interesting thing, y'all, about I can statements is that while I can statements are our learning goals, they can also be used as a tool to help measure student success. So if at the beginning of my lesson, my students know that the objective is to be able to cite textual evidence, when I create my success criteria for whatever assignment or task I'm giving my students at the end of the class period, one of the success criteria factors can be, oh, I can cite textual evidence, or textual evidence is cited. Similarly, with graphic organizers, the thing about graphic organizers that you all want to remember for success criteria is that if your graphic organizer, or if students are able to organize information in a graphic organizer, then their ability to organize that information in an effective way showcases an understanding of whatever topic that you might be studying. With rubrics, the really interesting thing about rubrics, y'all, is that the rubrics provide a clear understanding of what needs to be done to meet those expectations. So with some rubrics, you'll see they'll have something like, a beginning, an intermediate, and advanced, or, a beginning versus an expert. And you students can go in and actually see, if I have a beginning understanding of this at the beginning of the class period, this is what my work would look like. But if by the end of the class period, I'm supposed to be an expert on this particular topic, then these are the things that the rubric says I should actually have. And then alongside that, we talked about this in a little bit already, but this idea of targeted responses, right? These are also an example of like written exemplars or models that we're using, or procedures that we use in our STEM-based courses. And these just provide students with an idea, a picture of what the skill or the concept should look like in their actual task or as a result of them completing that task. So you might be wondering now, well, Tristan, why is success criteria so important? Why do we need these things? Why does it matter? Really, success criteria at the core of it is important because it can increase student achievement and increase student success inside the classroom and their confidence and your ability to teach as well. So success criteria can be thought of as a form of an assessment. This is an formative assessment that I'm giving to my students. And I can use this to measure how well our students understand a particular topic of skill. So again, I want to keep using this idea of textual evidence, right? If my success criteria is going to be, oh, students will be able to cite textual evidence, or students are going to cite textual evidence when they're writing this paragraph out, then one of the things that I can measure is how well the student actually cites that textual evidence. So since success criteria is a skill or a task, it allows me or you as the teacher to gain insight on how well the student can actually execute that particular skill or how much they know about a particular concept, right? So in that same way, if I had a student draw a Venn diagram to compare everything they know about two different revolutions or something like that, then on one end of the spectrum, I get to see all they know about this revolution. And then on the other side of that Venn diagram, I get to see what they know about the other revolution. And then in the middle, they're able to showcase any similar understandings that they have about it. So I get an understanding of the concept, or like I said, with the writing example, I get to see an understanding or how much they understand a particular skill. Now, there's some other reasons why this is important as well. So it says here that success criteria can be used as a pathway to help teachers ensure certain skills are taught, and also that students are able to identify the most important components of the lesson. So when we say success criteria can be used as a pathway, it's because this pathway can ensure that we're actually planning that students are able to use the right tools or use the right skills or learn about the right concepts. But alongside that, we actually get to monitor the students while they're actually doing these things. One of my favorite things about using success criteria is that when it's clearly communicated, and again, you all get a chance to see this a little later on, but when success criteria is clearly communicated and my preference in bullet points, then the student can say, oh, Mr. Hunter, I'm finished with the work. And I can say, okay, student, now go compare this to the success criteria and tell me, do you think you've met all of these parts? And if they're like, no, I didn't, I met all of these except for this, then I can say, okay, well, how can I support you as you go about trying to meet this goal? So it's a good way to give me insight on what I need to teach or what skills I can help my students build, but it also helps the students get a kind of pathway into these are the things that I'm going to have to learn in order to be able to do a particular task. Now, I already briefly talked about this idea of the benefits of success criteria, right? But here are three other major benefits. So this first idea is this idea of explicit expectations, right? So I have a really clear understanding that's been communicated both written and orally about what's expected of me, right? What am I expected to do in this assignment? So in this assignment, in order for me to be successful on this assignment, I have to have X, Y, and Z inside of this. Having those explicit expectations are really beneficial for the students, especially if the student feels like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. This at least gives them an idea of what they think they should be doing. Alongside that, it provides that opportunity for self-assessment. So we talked about this idea of self-assessment already. But with the success criteria, the big thing is that students are able to look at whatever the success criteria is. And then after they finish looking at that success criteria, then they're also able to go back and look at their own work and kind of do a compare and contrast on their own long before they even come to the teacher and ask them for support or even tell them, hey, I'm done with the work. And then last but not least, I talked about this already, this idea of immediate feedback on teaching and learning. So if I'm going through and me and my students are working on an assignment and I've communicated what the success criteria is already, and I go in and I see that students are missing a key piece of the success criteria, let's say they get 2 out of the 3 correct, then that means for me as a teacher, I need to bring my students back together as a whole group so that I can focus on that one piece of the success criteria that they aren't getting right. In that same way, it provides immediate feedback on learning because at the end of the class period, when the students turn this back in, I'm going to know, oh, so-and-so understands this because when I look at their work and I compare their work to the success criteria, they're able to meet all of the criteria that I put in place for this particular assignment. All right, so now let's take a look because we've done some discussion about like just what this looks like in theory, why it's important, but I want to make sure that you all get some concrete examples of what this can look like either in your subject area or subject areas that you may be supporting. So let's take a look at what these look like in a math class, a ELA class, a science class, a physical education class, and a social studies class. So in a math class, let's say we're in a ninth grade Algebra 1 class. Let's say the assignment is students are going to complete the following problems using the quadratic formula. So at this point, the students have been in the classroom with the teacher. The teacher has given them, their concept development around quadratic formula. And now the teacher is like, okay, I want you to work on this worksheet that has 10 problems on it. Now, the teacher is going to communicate, this is the success criteria that I need you all to do. So in order to be successful on this, in order to get a good grade on this, in order to be proficient in this, these are the 3 things that I need you all to do when you're doing this assignment. The first thing is that I need you to use the quadratic formula. If we're studying the quadratic formula, that's the formula that I want you to use, not any of the other methods, right? I also want you to show all of your work. So you have to show me how you work through those problems. And then last but not least, I want you to complete at least 7 of the 10 problems. So here in this example, y'all, what you'll see is that the math teacher gave them an assignment, and with that assignment, they gave very clear directions on what they were expecting the work to look like. So even if I'm a student who don't know exactly how to get started with this, I do know that I have to use the quadratic formula. I know I need to show all of the work, and I know I only need to complete 7 of these. So as a student who may not understand math, this is beneficial because it kind of gets me going a little bit so I can at least try using whatever previous knowledge or previous information the teacher may have given me before we started doing this. So that's one example of success criteria in a math class. Let's take a look at what it looks like in a 4th grade English language arts class. So let's say the assignment is just students are going to read a passage. And then after they read the passage, they're going to answer a set of short answer questions relating to the text, right? Now, the success criteria for this one is a little bit different. So the teacher said that they must be the answers must be written in complete sentences. So first things first, that's what the teacher says. They have to be in complete sentences. Then they said they must use textual evidence to support their answer. And then last but not least, they must fully answer their questions. So let's say that you were a student like me who thrived in an English class, right? Well, I know that before I go to turn this work in, whether I'm submitting it to a Google Classroom, where I'm submitting it to Canvas, where I'm turning it into the teacher as an exit ticket on the way out, I know that before I submit this assignment, that my short answer questions, each one of them should meet these 3 things. It should be written in a complete sentence. It should use textual evidence to support the answer, and it should also fully be answered. So the question should fully be answered in my response that I'm writing in those things. This one I thought was really funny as I was like coming up with examples because it's funny. That in the elementary school, you have to tell them to write in complete sentences. But also what I found in my experiences as a high school teacher as well, was that if I didn't say write in complete sentences, someone would always raise their hand and say, well, Mr. Hunter, do we have to write in complete sentences? So it also became nature for me when we were doing assignments that dealt with like writing and stuff to just always put the success criteria as, yes, you must write in complete sentences. All right, let's take a look at this science class. So in this science class, let's say we're doing a 10th grade biology class. And in this, the teacher is giving the students an experiment report. So the experiment has been done, and now a report has been written about it. And the teacher is giving this report to the students. And what the students are going to do is use the scientific method graphic organizer. So a graphic organizer is what they're going to use to actually analyze this report. In this success criteria, the teacher was very explicit about what she was or what they were expecting their students to do. So the first thing was that the students must identify all 5 steps of the scientific method. So as they're going through and they're reading this, they can go ahead and identify those, right? But the second thing was that the students must use the graphic organizer, and the teacher's providing the graphic organizer for them. So they must use the graphic organizer, and they must identify all 5 steps of the scientific method. But then last but not least, what the teacher said was that they must use complete sentences within that graphic organizer. So even in this, y'all, where the teacher gives me that graphic organizer that can be used as the thing that's going to show my success, that I'm able to demonstrate knowledge. Even in this, there were some clear expectations that are being communicated as I go through and complete this. Hopefully what you all are seeing right now is the goal is for the students to have a clear understanding of what's going on or what's expected in the assignment that they're going to be completing. Let's take a look at what this looks like in a 9th grade PE class. So let's say that the assignment is that the students will demonstrate their ability to underhand and overhand serve the volleyball over the net. Now, here's the success criteria. The teacher said that the students just needed to be able to demonstrate at least 70% accuracy in the things that they're doing. But then not only that, but the students should also be able to practice proper form. So if the students are able to do both of these things, then that means they're going to be successful or proficient in this particular assignment. All right, I want to slow things down a little bit now because I want to show you all what this looks like in a live context. So we're going to take a look at actually my ninth grade world history class. This is a social studies example. And the assignment that the students were given was they're going to be comparing and contrasting the religious views of Egyptian and Mesopotamian culture through a blog post. Here's their success criteria. It has to be at least 250 to 300 words. It needs to fully answer each question. They need to cite their sources and use at least 2 sources for textual support. As we get ready to watch this video, there are 2 things that I want you all to pay very close attention to. One, pay close attention to how I introduce my success criteria to the students. This is all taking place right at the beginning of class, but then also take a look at how I go through and explain those success criteria to them. So let's take a look at this example. All right, so let's go ahead and get started by going over our objectives. You all can see that today your objective is going to be to compare and contrast the Egyptian and Mesopotamian views on religion and afterlife using those primary documents. You guys really are just picking back up where you left off yesterday in class. Your checkpoint or your success criteria for today is going to be your day 4 product with your blog post. So for your blog post, your success criteria are these 4 things. You want to make sure that it's at least 250 to 350 words. You also want to make sure that you're fully answering those questions and providing full explanations for those. Alongside that, I'm asking that you cite your sources that you decide to use, because your last success criteria is that you're able to use at least 2 pieces of textual evidence to support your answers. Alongside that, what you all see is on the agenda. It's a really simple day today. We just did our warm-up. After we do the warm-up, we're going to spend some time in our day 4 work session just so you all can start working on your product. And then at the end of class, we're going to come back together for about the last 15 minutes and start working on your study guide. One more thing to make note of over here on the board, as you all can see, you do have a new quiz date. It's going to be on the 9th instead of the original date. So please make sure that you use some time between tonight, tomorrow, and the day after that to just plan for studying and things of that nature. And there is no homework tonight, but again, you do want to make sure inside of your planning you're using that time to do some studying. What questions, comments, concerns do you all have about what we're doing today? All right, so in that example, y'all, this is what I want to point out to you all is when you ask yourself, what's the point of success criteria? I want you all to start thinking about what's the destination. So in this, or the part of the reason why I introduced it to my students at the beginning of the class is because this was before we started doing our actual work. So this was before they were introduced to the knowledge. This was before they were given the resources that we're going to be using for today. I wanted them to already have at the front of their mind, this is what Mr. Hunter is going to ask me to do at the end of class, or whenever it's time to start working independently or with my partners or however we're working that day. This is what Mr. Hunter wants me to do. So the question at the forefront of every class when it comes down to success criteria is, what's the destination? What is it that I want my students to be able to do? So when you all start developing your own success criteria, there are 2 questions that I want you to ask yourselves as you start crafting these questions out. The first question is just, what skill or knowledge do I want my students to be able to demonstrate? If we go back and look at my example about my world history class that we just looked at, there were quite a few things that I wanted my students to be able to do. The skill that I wanted my students to be able to do was compare and contrast, right? But then the knowledge that I needed my students to be able to understand was they needed to have knowledge of the Egyptian society and Mesopotamian culture as it related to religion, right? But then after I figure out that first question, or those 2 questions, the second question that I want to answer is just, what specific ways do I want to demonstrate those things? So I had to think about what method I wanted my students to be able to demonstrate that knowledge. Did I want them to do a written response? Did I want them to do a PowerPoint? Did I want them to do a blog post? Did I want them to come up and speak about those things in a group setting? What do I want it to do, or what specific way do I want it done? So when we start talking about the importance or the point of success criteria, it does a lot, like I said, for or supports us in both teaching and learning, teaching in the sense of I can't just throw some success criteria on the board. This has to be well thought out. This has to be meaningful. This has to be something that makes sense to what's going on in the context of whatever lesson that I'm teaching. But in terms of learning, it's going to also show me as the teacher what skills my students need to work on or need some support in, and then also what knowledge gaps exist and what we're already studying. So let's take a look now at how you can actually go about crafting your own success criteria. So when we talk about making our own success criteria or crafting our own success criteria inside our classrooms, there are 3 specific steps that I want you all to start thinking about. This first one is this idea of just identifying the task, right? Again, we see this explicitly played out in that video I just showed you. So in the first step, you're identifying the task and you're asking yourself, what actual assignment will my students be working on? What do I want my students doing for this, exit ticket? What do I want my students to be doing for this assignment throughout the class? What is it that my students are working on, right? What's that actual assignment? But then after I figure out what that actual assignment is, in my case, it was I wanted my students to compare and contrast the religious views of the ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian cultures, right? So I identified my task. That's what I want them to do, my task, my assignment, right? But then I needed to go in and unpack my skills and knowledge. Now, in order to complete the assignment, this is the question I'm asking myself: what skills or knowledge from the lesson being taught will be used to complete this task? So this is important. This goes back to that idea of me saying success criteria just can't be thrown on the board, right? Because I have to make sure that my lessons are going to equip my students to be able to do the assignment, right? So I have to ask myself, what in the lesson am I going to make sure that I teach so that my students will be able to complete this assignment? And also, what skills do I either need to review, sharpen up on, or just teach my students so that they'll be able to do this? So in my example, when they talk about this idea of unpacking skills or knowledge, I told you all before, the skills that my students are going to need is that they need to be able to compare and contrast, right? There's some other like embedded skills in there, of course, around writing, but the major skill that we look at, or the highest leverage skill, is my skill of my skill of comparing and contrasting. Now, after I figured out those skills, I still need to figure out the knowledge, right? So what knowledge needs to be actually presented to them, given to them, taught to them, embedded in them, deposited, whatever words you want to use, what knowledge needs to be taught inside of this lesson. And in this case, it was the knowledge around the ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures in relations to their religious views. So those were the 2 things that I needed to figure out how I was going to introduce to my students through a lesson, right? Because I knew at the end of the class, the task that I wanted at hand. Now, the last thing that you want to figure out after you have identified the task, after you identified the skills and the knowledge that's going to be associated with that task, the last thing you want to do is identify how you want these skills and knowledges demonstrated. So the big thing to remember here is just the how. How do I want my students to show me they know what they're doing, or that they're able to meet my learning objective for that day, right? So now that I know the skills and knowledge that's being covered in my lesson, how are my students going to actually demonstrate that understanding? Are they going to use a graphic organizer? Are they going to use a blog post like I did? Are they going to come up and give oral presentations? Are they going to make a PowerPoint? Are they going to write a song? What is the method or the how that I want my students to be able to use in order to do this? Because from that how is where you're going to actually go ahead and start unpacking your success criteria through your model exemplar. So here's a good point where I want you all to, we're going to pause for a second, or if you're watching this now, I want you to pause because we're going to take a second to do a guided practice. So we're going to think through this together. And what I want you all to do is just think about the success criteria of a 6th grade ELA class. I have a scenario for you, and I want us to take a look at this scenario to talk about what success criteria could possibly look like in this class. So here's the scenario. In a 6th grade ELA class, they're studying how to use textual evidence to support their answers. Now, the teacher then gives them a short story and a set of open response questions to practice this skill. Here's the question that I want you all to think about. What are some success criteria that can be used for this task? So I want you to take a second and pause here. I want you to think about what are some actual bullet pointed success criteria or checklist items that you would look for if you were in this class and you were getting ready to grade these short response questions. All right, so now that you're back, here are some of the examples of what success criteria could look like. Now, it doesn't have to look like this. These are just my examples. These can vary by teacher. There's no one standard to what the success criteria can look like. So in this, what I said was the answers must be in complete sentences. They must use textual evidence, and they must include a page and paragraph number. And you might be wondering, well, Tristan, why did you do this? Because I'm relating this right back to the thing that they're studying. So remember, they're studying textual evidence. So it's important that whatever task I'm asking them to do is going to allow them to demonstrate an understanding that they either understand how textual evidence works or they've mastered the skill of being able to cite textual evidence. So through my success criteria, I wanted to make sure that my success criteria focus mostly on that idea of textual evidence. So these last two in particular, where I'm citing or I'm using textual evidence, and then I'm also including a page and a paragraph number. All right, so we're going to take a second and we're going to do another quick break. This is when the lab portion comes in there, right? Where in this one, I want you all to think about the content area you are the most familiar with. Listen, I have been in places before where I've taught the content and the content was not the content I was the most familiar with, but I was qualified to teach it. So here's what I want you to think about. Think about the content area you're the most qualified or the most familiar with. And I want you to take a few seconds to construct a sample success criteria. Here's what I want you to consider as you're doing this. Think about a lesson you either already taught or a lesson you're planning to teach soon. And I just want you to ask yourself, what are some sample criteria that can be used for this task? And remember those two guiding questions that we have when we're trying to plan out our success criteria. It's just what skills and knowledge do I want my students to demonstrate, but then also what specific ways do I want them to demonstrate it? So go ahead and pause for a second and give yourself a few minutes just to come up with some sample criteria, and then we'll come back together in a second. All right, so now that you've crafted your own examples of success criteria, here's some things that I want you all to remember about success criteria in general. The first thing is that success criteria is a goal, it's not a suggestion. This isn't me saying, hey, students, your work can look like this, but it doesn't need to look like this. Now, this is me saying, hey, students, this is my expectation that after we go through the lesson, after I give you all the tools that you need and support you along the way, that the product you submit for the class that day, it has the following things in it. So this isn't a suggestion. This is what it needs to be. The other thing to remember is that you can have one or many success criteria. So there have been cases in class where I've only had one item listed under my success criteria. And sometimes that item was something as simple as answers need to be written in complete sentences. But in other cases, there were multiple pieces of success criteria. You saw my blog post example. In some cases, it requires you to have more than just one bullet point, but in other cases, it's okay to have just one. And also remember, success criteria can come directly from your learning goals. We saw that in the example with the 6th grade classroom when they were doing textual evidence, right? So if I know that my learning goal for that day is that I can cite textual evidence, then my success criteria needs to have something, my product for my success criteria, the success criteria for my product, needs to have something in there that's going to explain or test them on their abilities to cite textual evidence. And then last but not least, y'all just remember those two guiding questions. And I know they're technically three, but I put that first one together. Remember those two guiding questions when you're trying to use when implementing success criteria. What skills or knowledge are needed to complete this? And then how do I want them to actually go about completing those lessons? At this point, this is normally the part of the presentation where I would take questions, comments, and concerns. I urge you all, if you are watching this later on and it's not live, to send me an email. And all that stuff is going to be on the next slide, I think. So you can send me an email if you have questions. You can contact the Facebook page or the Instagram page to get in contact. Don't let your questions go unnoticed. Go ahead and let me know what questions you have or what support you might need in those. Just want to take a second to first off, like you guys said, thank you all so much for your interest in the Beginning Teacher Institute. This isn't the only session that we're offering this semester. We have a few more already planned out. The registration for these can all be found on teachingwithtristan.org. When you go to the website, you'll see a banner up there for the Beginning Teacher Institute. You can go right ahead and click up there and register for any of these sessions. If you have a school or a district that wants to do it, or a group, a PLC that wants to focus on a particular one, then you also have the opportunity on their website to go in and choose like a specific one and at a specific time and all those other things. Also, I want to make note of the survey link at the bottom of the screen. There, I do urge you all, please, please, please fill out the survey. All feedback is good feedback. And I 1,000% mean that. So if there's something that you feel like I could do better with this particular session, if there's something that you're like, you know what, Tristan, I really love this, but I really hated that. Listen, I want to hear it. Please take a few minutes just to fill out that survey. Also, in that if you were taking this to get CEUs or you're using this toward your CEUs, please make sure when you take your survey that you leave in the comment section both the fact that you are taking it with the expectation of a certificate so that I can make sure you get that, but then also make sure you leave your email in there as well so I can make sure I send you your certificate. And then last but not least, y'all, here are just the references, the two major references that I used for my presentation. And thank you all so much for tuning in.